Hello everyone, Eternal has updated. We're up to patch 1.16 now. And we've got a couple of new cards to talk about, as well as a couple of balance changes. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. So first off, there are five new promo cards, one of each color, and you get one as part of the promo event, but they are uncommon, so they can be crafted for dust if you need to. Obviously, it's pretty easy to just get them through the quests, but crafting them might be better if you want to just get a deck started immediately. Either way, it shouldn't take you more than 2 days to, well, it'll take you about 2 days to 3 days to get all of the sets of each of the cards. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at each one in turn. We're going to talk a little bit about them and where they fit and what they do. All right, first off, Fevered Scout. Fevered Scout is a 2/2 for 3 in 1 red, and when you play a spell, Fevered Scout gets +2/+2 for the turn. It has some pretty sweet art, kind of interesting looking. Fevered Scout is a pretty decent draft pick and maybe an okay aggro red card. I think it's actually has a place in like mono red aggro and like red purple aggro where you're trying to just generate a lot of aggression all at once. The main issue with it is that its body is not very strong early on, so it's somewhat vulnerable to Torch. But on the other hand, it also serves as a trap for Torch, because as a 2/2 you can play it down, and if it's not immediately killed and someone tries to torch it in response to an attack or something like that, then you can just play a spell of your own like Rapid Shot, and that'll give Fevered Scout the +2/+2. It'll make it immune to the torch, and it'll make it immune to suffocate. It'll do a lot of those types of things, so that's pretty good for getting just a lot of value out of this card. As a result, you want to torch Fevered Scout the turn that it comes down if you're worried about it actually pushing through for aggression. Yeah, I see this deck mostly fitting in Stone Scar aggro lists. It is a unusual card, and it's pretty hard to evaluate, but I think that it could be potentially pretty strong. The main problem is, once again, that stat line is just a little bit weak, but that's going to make it quite decent in draft, even though you don't have as many spells in draft. It'll turn most of your combat tricks into big bombs, where Fevered Scout becomes a 4/4 for 3, and that's pretty effective in draft. So if you can do that just once or twice, that'll be really key to pushing someone down in a draft game. So I think all of these promo cards have some exciting features in draft in particular. They actually they really kind of call out in that particular respect. The one exception might be, but isn't really, Find the Way. All right, Find the Way is our new secret pages, or rather, it's not our new secret pages, but the history of secret pages, if you are not aware, it previously was a 2-cost time card with Echo that said draw a sigil of your choice from your deck. And that card was bonkers. You had to put it in pretty much every control deck because it was extremely good at making sure that you always had enough sigils and always had enough power for whatever it was that you wanted to do. Find the Way does the same thing, except this time around there's a drawback, which is that the power that you draw is depleted when played. And that's a really interesting drawback overall. I think this card definitely has a lot of strength. The thing that it does is it makes sure that you always have a reliable curve. Like, you are always going to get to your next step in every setup, but the main problem here, of course, is that you are a turn behind on power every single turn. So Find the Way is going to create some really interesting control deck setups. It's only really usable in those slow archetypes, but it's a really interesting card for that respect, and I think it's definitely going to see some constructed play. In draft, it is a really good fixer, and being able to get like power out of your deck when you need to is pretty decent, so I think it's probably worth taking a look at. And all of these are uncommons, so they're actually specifically designed, yeah, once again, for draft. Like, they're going to be sort of exciting to see when you're in those draft settings. Speaking of weird draft cards, Throne Warden is one of the harder ones to evaluate out of all of them. A 4/4 Aegis with Summon, you gain 4 armor, 4, 5, and 2 time. Overall, the stat line's not too bad. I've actually read this as being 7 because, of course, the way that annotation works in Eternal is that you say something like 5 green, and if you're a Magic player, you read that as costing 7, but because in Eternal, however, it's 5 and then Influence. So In any case, so this is actually quite a bit better than I expected it to be. A 4/4 Aegis is a pretty strong body. There's one other card that's a 4/4 Aegis for 4, which is Copperhall Elite, and that card has Overwhelm, which makes it fairly strong. Overall, I think this card actually does have some places. It's got some decent things going on in Armory decks. It might actually make Plated Demolisher happen. It might be the last armor card that we need to make Plated Demolisher happen. I can always hope. But overall, the body isn't really all that impressive, and it is going to struggle to deal with some other things. It is, however, just a really good, essentially, health gain card. So this is a card that you use when you're trying to deal with aggro decks, because aggro decks like Stonescar Burn in particular are going to have problems with this card. As a 4/4, it blocks most of their stuff, not necessarily Champion of Chaos, but usually Champion of Chaos. And it also prevents a spell from being cast on it while being a reasonable body and gaining you a decent amount of health. And that health can be used for armory decks, for armor in specific, but keep in mind that armor is also just a health gain tool. So getting something like this out could give you a leg up against aggro decks, and it might be a very, very good draft card for that reason. Overall, I think this card is going to be pretty niche and constructed, but there's a potential for decks to be built around this idea. Okay, next up is Borderlands Waykeeper. And Borderlands Waykeeper is our blue card. Borderlands Waykeeper is very unusual. Borderlands Waykeeper is a 1/3 Aegis, so once again, it's sort of a counter aggro card. Like, it's small, it blocks stuff, and it's pretty good at just dealing with like little token strategies. This is like a pretty significant nerf to the Shimmerpack deck and to the Stonescar Jito deck if people actually end up playing the card. The ultimate on it is pay 4 to give it +1 strength and flying, and having a +1 strength flying unit with Aegis is reasonable, but essentially you've paid 6 for that, and you've essentially gotten an aerial ace, which is not a very strong card in draft or in constructed. So it's hard to say if this is going to be good. Note that the 6 cost for 2/3 is something of a lie. The fact that it costs 4 to give it 2 in flying does mean that you tend to get it faster than an aerial ace, so that staggered cost does make up for the fact that its stat line is a little bit unimpressive. I think overall this card does have a place. I think it's, again, a really interesting draft uncommon. I'm not sure if it's going to go into most constructed decks, because constructed decks that revolve around Aegis flyers are usually trying to play them with things like Cloud Snake Hatchling, or to play things that like actually activate when you have flying. I don't know. It's got some potential. It's probably the weakest card out of the 5, but it may be pretty decent, and Flying Aegis is really an archetype that hasn't been explored enough yet, and I think actually has some potential for a deck. So it'll be interesting to see if we can play with this. Next up is Xenon Cultist. Xenon Cultist is our purple. It is 3 and 2 shadow, so you have to go pretty deep into shadow for this, and whenever one of your other units is killed, that unit gets +2/+2. I missed that. That's actually pretty hilarious. So this card buffs units when they die, and when I read this card in preparation for this, I was thinking that it gave Xenon Cultist +2/+2. Nope, it gives units bonuses when they die. So this is a pretty strong Scream card. This is a pretty strong card for any deck that functions around resurrection engines. And yeah, in general, it's just going to make everything that you put into the void a more difficult threat. I think it's going to have some issues in constructed decks. It's actually pretty decent. The 2/4 stat line is pretty durable. The fact that it's a single color does make it a little bit vulnerable to things like Annihilate, of course, but overall, it's immune to torches. It's kind of annoying to kill. It's really not a big enough threat that you immediately want to kill it. So there's a chance that Xenon Cultist can stick to the board in a constructed deck. In a draft game, you're going to draft this really heavily with resurrection abilities like Dark Return, and with cards that can come back from the void. This card has some fun synergies with Ephemeral Wisp and Dawnwalker, so it's a really fun addition to the Xenon serial killers decks. It's really, really cute. And to that extent, I'm not sure if it's going to be good and constructed. Being cute is not usually necessarily the key to getting like a reliable game going. So Xenon Cultist may be something that ends up getting killed every time that something else of yours is about to get killed, and you're so excited that it's going to get that +2/+2, and then your opponent is like, annihilate, or something like that. I think that because of that stat line, it's got a better chance than most of actually getting those +2/+2 bonuses on your dead units. It's a really unique advantage card that builds advantage in your void, which is just kind of a foreign concept, and it'll be interesting to see how this card plays out. So overall, the theme of these 5 cards, I think, is they're really interesting draft uncommons. Like, they're really interesting picks that are going to extremely increase, well, not extremely increase, but they're going to increase and widen the different archetypes that draft decks include. They're also decent build around me's that are pretty fun for many different like constructed decks, and whether or not any of them while none of them really immediately impresses me, I think that they will have some strength in those decks, and I think that's like part of the uncommon label right there. They're just gonna be really interesting. I think at least one of them has the potential to be really, really strong, but they're actually very well designed cards with decent amounts of drawbacks and decent amounts of advantages. So we'll see how they go, and I hope that there are some decks that are made that make them good. We'll certainly be experimenting with them ourselves. All right, finally, there are some balance changes. There's also some UI improvements. You can now buy a token of some kind. Where is that? Store? The store is currently not available, or there's the store. Yeah, okay. You can now buy a new totem, the Argenport Silverwing, which is only available through gems. And you can also test out your totems. This is just, you know, like basically cute little fun stuff that you can do, like just entirely cosmetic goofy stuff if you want to throw Direwolf a couple extra dollars, but you've already got all of the cards that you need, or you want to just do the free-to-play run. And you can click on different parts of this. They all do different things. It's pretty cute. But anyways, there's also some UI changes. Sandstorm Titan shows a VFX for things that can't fly. Leviathan shows a visual effect for things that can't play spells. Reality Warden shows a visual effect for things that can't leave the void, and Calderan Channeler has some new art. I guess we can cover that real quick. Calderan Channeler is now called Calderan Gunsmith, which matches the sort of swords and sorcery, or rather the guns and sorcery type thing that Eternal is going for. And, ooh, I really like this art. I actually am really impressed with this card. It's pretty. It doesn't do anything different. It's still the same card that it always was. Triggers infiltrates, does fun things like that. That's just cool art though. Yeah, all right, pretty sweet. Okay, so finally the card changes. We have a sort of a sad one and maybe a happy one depending on which side of the deck you were on. Excavate is now unable to leave the void. So you can no longer excavate excavates, you can no longer echo excavates and give them the ability to essentially like excavate more stuff. This was always sort of a toxic pattern, so I'm mostly in favor of it. It's generally true that I like excavate a lot, and I really wanted excavate to be a little bit more powerful, mainly as a single effect. I didn't really like the excavate style of deck where you basically just don't draw new cards off your deck and you don't get a lot of like interesting stuff going on, but I do like excavate as a card, and I like that sort of fiddly, like interesting recursion stuff that goes on with it. So this fix is, you know, it's fixing a toxic play pattern, but in general it's definitely a little bit sad. We're not terribly happy about this, and I kind of wish that it had its awesome health gain back or something as a result, but all the same, yet another nerf to the Carpet Shuffle deck. That's very unfortunate, but what are you gonna do? All right, so next thing that we have is... Let me figure out where they are. Okay, Excavate has been nerfed. Sand Warrior has been buffed, and that's kind of cute. Sand Warrior is now a 3/3, so it now actually has a decent stat line for being a 0-cost unit with 3-time influence. This makes the card playable again, and I'm really excited to make some Stand Warrior decks. This may or may not be a good card at this point. It's certainly a bit more value. It's significantly less vulnerable and isn't going to trade with tokens all the time. Obviously, Stand Warrior offers a really weird and interesting play pattern. So basically, getting this out with Combray Strangers is going to be really interesting. We'll see how this goes. I'm thankful for the buff because it definitely needed it. It wasn't a very competitive card before. Water of Life is back down to 1. It used to be 1, then it moved up to 2 in open beta. That made the card unplayable, so I'm glad that it's back to 1. As it is, having some cheap health gain at this point is a pretty good thing to have if you are playing against like the Stonescar Burn archetypes. This is something that we might actually start seeing now that it's back to being cheap, and of course the Echo ability makes it reproducible. It's never been a very strong card. It's always a little bit on the weak side because it doesn't have any advantage or inherent advantage, it just stalls. But now that it's cheaper, it should be really interesting, and set 2 is going to apparently have some cards that will function around healing abilities, so this is a card to keep an eye on. Alright, finally, the big one, Shimmer Pack has been moved from 7 to 8. This card has been dominating the meta for a while, and it's certainly unfortunate that it had to be nerfed, but I think overall this is probably going to be fine. An 8-cost card is about the cost that you expect for a big, ridiculous effect like this. It's similar to Channel the Tempest. You generally are trying to watch out for that 8 cost, and the thing that this really puts a damper on, I think, is that what you were primarily doing was once again breaking the game with Scouting Party. Scouting Party has been sort of the problem child, I would say, here of Eternal for a little while. So previously you could play Scouting Party and then you could immediately play Shimmer Pack on 7 and you just have an army capable of killing your opponent instantly. And that was pretty nice. Shimmer Pack has had that nice open beta buff where it can transform any units, not just your units, and it's been a really, really dominant deck archetype. So this will slow down the Shimmer Pack meta a little bit. It's going to open things up, and we'll see where it goes. We should see a significantly more vibrant meta as a result of these new cards and these new balance changes, and I'm pretty excited to see how that functions. But alas, Shimmer Pack is a little bit more expensive. Alright, so that is the majority of the changes. There have been some bug fixes, some visual effect fixes, all of the standard stuff, and the patch notes for that will be linked in the description. That is it for me. I'm going to go stream Eternal now, and thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time with some new deck brews, I hope. And yeah, we will be playing in the November Invitational this month. And that's pretty much it. Feel free to like or subscribe if you liked, and thanks again for watching. Have a good one.